Welcome to Smalls Talks Balls, presented by Champions Round. And now your host, Steph Smalls.
What is going on, everyone? Smalls Talks Balls is back after my small hiatus here. Finally, the 32-team preview that I have been relentlessly talking about is here. We're going to start with NFC North. And to kick that off, I had to bring on Andy Herman to talk about the Green Bay Packers. Great team to start with. How's it going, Andy?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. I'm so excited to be the very first one on your 32-team breakdown. Hopefully I don't drop the ball for you like the Packers did in the playoffs a season ago. So we're going to kick off a new season on the right foot. But thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited about it.
Of course. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you? Because you have a fantastic podcast that, if you guys have not checked out, absolutely awesome.
I appreciate that greatly. So you can find me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can see it right there. And then you can also find the podcast at PackADay Podcast and wherever you get your favorite audio podcast. And you can also find it on YouTube as well. 365 days a year, Packers content every single day. You don't want to miss it.
Love it. And let's just get right into it. Let's start with the draft. How do you feel as a whole the draft went? I know that everyone's going to be itching to talk about the wide receiver, so I'll try. We'll get there because I know that's the question and that's what everyone wants to talk about. But also the Packers made some nice defensive moves too this offseason that probably aren't getting enough attention. But let's talk draft. How did they do overall?
Yeah, so I thought this was a really interesting draft for the Packers. I thought it was an interesting draft overall, right? So it didn't have a lot of the top tier players at a lot of the top tier positions that you would normally expect. And we know that like everyone wanted to see Green Bay get a wide receiver early, and then you have that huge run on wide receivers. So it didn't necessarily go in Green Bay's factor or in favor in that situation. Plus they traded away Davonte Adams, which of course was a huge deal. They pick up a first and second. So you end up with all this ammunition that's between like picks 20 and pick like 60, right? So they had to sort of move themselves around, but I really like what Brian Gutekunst did overall. So I would label Brian as a little bit of a gambler in the early rounds of the draft. And what I mean by that is he's usually willing to take a little bit of a home run swing. And we saw that with Jaire Alexander. He was a little bit undersized, a little bit of a playmaker, and that certainly paid off. They did it with Rashawn Gary, right? Where everyone was like, well, he's got a little bit of a bum shoulder and he didn't have the productivity. There's no way, somebody's going to take him in the top 12. Well, Brian Gutekunst took him top 12. That turned out pretty darn well. Jordan Love, to be determined, but that was a bit of a gamble as well. Even Eric Stokes, a lot of people had him as like a mid to even late second round pick. He picks him up in the first round. That turned out really well as well. So he's been a little bit of a gambler in the first round, looking for those high profile prospects. I think he did that again with his first 3 picks. So with Devonte Wyatt, with Quay Walker, and with Christian Watson, I think you have 3 super athletes that have the ability to be top of their position players if they reach their ceiling. And I think if Green Bay hits on 2 of the 3, they'll be thrilled. And, who knows who the 2 are out of those 3. But, Christian Watson, to me, now the odds that he hits his ceiling are not going to be the same as a Chris Olave or a Drake London or some of those type of players, right? But to me, if every wide receiver in this draft hits their ceiling, Christian Watson's is as high as any player in this draft. And again, I'm not saying he is likely to hit that, but it's as high as anyone's. Devonte Wyatt, same thing, right? Like as a defensive tackle, he can hold up against the run, he can penetrate, he can get in the backfield. He could be as good as any defensive lineman in this draft. And Quay Walker, I think you could say the same thing as an off-ball linebacker. He has everything that you want from a job description standpoint. So he went high-end, possibilities with those 3 picks, sort of home run swings again. Then he kind of, navigated the middle of the draft with finding some pieces that might be able to help them, right? So you've got your Sean Ryan, your Romeo Dobbs, your I always want to say Cameron Tom, which is his brother, but Zachary Tom or Zach Tom, and then Kingsley Enagbare, 4 players who could help them, more solid players, rotational players to begin with, who could eventually develop. And then in the 7th round, he basically just grabbed 4 guys that he's hoping can be, specialists, special teams, run stuffer, swing tackle, those sort of things. So I really liked how he navigated kind of the 3 sections of the draft: home run swings, solid players, and then just trying to find something or some way that these 7th rounders could stick.
Yeah, I think especially those first 3 picks, I think you nailed it. You get even 2 out of the 3 of these guys to hit, and I think it's an absolute home run. You have Quay Walker, who I think you just look at size, length, range, cover. I think he's the perfect pair for Campbell. And I think that, it's funny because the memes couldn't have come out faster when they didn't take a wide receiver in the first round, which we could have expected, right? I mean,
exactly.
You don't have Davante Adams. It's this ongoing joke that they don't draft a receiver, but I think they did that in Christian Watson. And I guess it's a nice way to just segment into the wide receiver room, because I think the knock probably for them is there's no clear wide receiver one. They're not lacking depth by any means. And you add a Christian Watson who can kind of be, I don't know, maybe I'll ask you where you think he falls into it. Is he more of this like deep threat gadget type guy? And then who has that higher ceiling to maybe be that wide receiver one for them with the absence of Davante Adams?
Yeah, so we could go in a million different directions with this.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing I'll say, right, is like clearly Green Bay wanted Davante Adams back, and Matt LaFleur wanted Davante Adams to be a part of this offense. And it was Davante that wanted to go play with the Raiders and be with Derek Carr and those sort of things. So I'm not saying that Green Bay was like, willing and wanting to go in another direction. It just happened that way. But I think you can also make an argument in a couple ways that we saw 3 opportunities for Green Bay for them to win a Super Bowl with the MVP of the league in Aaron Rodgers, the best wide receiver in football, Davante Adams, and Matt LaFleur as the head coach / offensive coordinator, right? Plus Aaron Jones and really good offense overall. We saw this really back-to-back years, high-powered offense with those players, and they won 2 playoff games in 3 years. And so offense and being this juggernaut offense with an MVP quarterback, best wide receiver in football, it only took them so far. So I think in one way, they've decided now to sort of build this team around defense, try to improve their special teams so it's not the worst special teams in the history of special teams. And in the meantime, maybe make their wide receiver and their overall team a little bit more diverse and a little bit more depth and a little bit more talent spread out throughout the course of the team. And I think the other thing I'll say in regards to that is, I think when you look at Matt LaFleur's offense, I don't think his offense was ever designed to have an alpha at wide receiver where you're targeting him 18 times a game and that's the game plan, right? Or that Rodgers is checking to plays to throw to Davante, or he's looking his first read to Davante on, again, 18 to 20 plays per game. I would have done the same thing if I had Davante Adams, or if I was throwing to Davante Adams, or if I was the quarterback under center. I would have looked his way almost every single time too. But Matt LaFleur's system is really set up to be job oriented and taking, advantage of mismatches and what the defense is going to give you. And I think a wide receiver by committee approach where all of these guys have some blocking ability, they can all do different things. They've got possession receivers in Sammy Watkins and Allen Lazard. They've got speed receivers now in Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. And then they've got some slot gadget guys, including Amari Rodgers, Randall Cobb, and maybe even Christian Watson there as well too. So, right, they've got these different flavors of wide receivers now that I think can all do the jobs that they need to do. And when you add in an Aaron Jones and an AJ Dillon and a Robert Tonyan and a Mercedes Lewis, and then this entire offense, not to mention the MVP at quarterback, I think can really execute this LaFleur offense the way that it's supposed to go, which sort of brings me to your ultimate question of like, who ends up being the number one? I'm not sure that Matt LaFleur is concerned about that. I don't know that he cares. Like, I just want, I think he wants to be able to take the mismatch and the plays that he wants to run and have everyone, all 11 on the field, go out and execute that play to get the optimal result. And I think sometimes with Rodgers, maybe over targeting or overlooking at Adams, which again, I would have done as well. I think sometimes that was at the detriment to what they were actually trying to accomplish and to get into a flow of an offense that was going to sort of complement everyone, right? So, and then the last part of that with Christian Watson is I think he has 2 things that you can probably do right away, right? So he can probably be a speed guy on the outside, sort of similar to what MVS did even in his rookie and maybe second year, where he wasn't a complete wide receiver yet, but you've got a 4.3 40 guy on the outside. And if you're not cognizant of that, he will take the top off of the defense and you can throw it to him deep. But I also think he has a gadget ability to his game that MVS never had, so that you can give it to him on end arounds and jet sweeps and reverses that Matt LaFleur loves to do. You can line him up in the backfield. He can be a kick returner. So while he learns the nuances of going from, basically, North Dakota State and a lower level of competition to the NFL, while he develops that, I still think there's going to be things that he can bring to the table, even in the immediate future. Right.
And I think that the ultimate goal is how do we spread the ball and win? I mean, they've done this with Davante Adams. And this isn't that they're automatically better off because but they are 7-0 without Davante Adams. There's all these stats that you can bring 31.5 points without him there. So I think the idea is how do we win games? And if you can get Rodgers to maybe not be honing in on just one guy, how do we spread the ball? Does even, I'd like to see what Lazard does with a little bit more opportunity. Does that, is he able to step in a little bit more? Is that wide receiver 1 role? I don't know if I feel super confident about that, but I think that there's enough weapons there. Again, like you said, You bring in Aaron Jones, who you have seen when Davante Adams isn't there, step into a little bit bigger of a role. He gets a lot more of those touches. But do you think they add a Julio Jones and OBJ?
I don't, at least not in the immediate future. And the reason I say that is I think I think they have 7 or 8, maybe even I think they probably have 8 guys that they feel are 53-man roster type players, right? So I think you look at their team overall, the 3 guys that they just drafted, and then you've got Watkins and Lazard and Amari Rodgers and Randall Cobb. I think they still like Malik Taylor, even a guy like Juwan Winfrey is somebody I think they like. I think there's 8 or 9 guys that are capable of being on a 53-man roster. So any person that you bring in now, right? Now, one of those guys is now also off the team because you can only keep so many wide receivers. In addition, I think they want to see what they have at this wide receiver group, right? So what does Sammy Watkins look like in this Matt LaFleur offense with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback? Can Allen Lazard, like you just mentioned, everyone's bet against Allen Lazard every step of the way. Well, he can't be, he's an undrafted guy. Well, he's a practice squad guy for the Jaguars. Well, now he brings him in Green Bay. Well, he's the 6th or 5th wide receiver. And then he gets a chance. Well, he can't be anything more than a 4. Then he couldn't be a 3. Then he couldn't be he's just consistently moved up every time. So what does he give you? What do the 3 rookies in Watson and Dobbs and Toure give you? Does Amari Rodgers take a step up from a season ago? So I think there's enough questions and how does Robert Tonyan come back? I think all of those are legitimate questions to be we want to see how all of this blends and gels together in training camp first. And I get that there could be a time or a situation where, hey, listen, if you want OBJ or Julio, you might need to get them in the next couple weeks, right? Or 3 weeks or whatever. Maybe those guys are signed quicker. And if you don't act now, they may be gone. But I do think that there's a chance that, they would just want to see their guys. And maybe, maybe Odell is a guy that waits until he's healthy and then goes to the highest bidder based on, what teams are actually good at that point in the season. And rather than signing with a team now where maybe their quarterback gets hurt and then he's stuck with a team that he can't win a Super Bowl with this year, does he wait till he's healthy and then go to the highest bidder somewhere mid-season, right? So that could be a time where Green Bay is maybe all right, maybe a couple of these wide receivers didn't pan out or a couple guys got hurt. We're 1 guy away. We're going to sign OBJ to a big contract mid-season that's, prorated down the road and bring that guy in. Or look at somebody at the trade deadline where wide receivers sort of been the one position where we've seen traction at the trade deadline, whether it's been Emmanuel Sanders or, Marvin Jones, these sort of players Mohamed Sanu, not Marvin Jones, where we've seen these players get traded. That's the one position that does. So I think they may look to see what they have first. And then if they don't like it, maybe attack it after that.
Right. So is the Davante Adams ordeal as big of a deal as everyone made it?
Maybe I don't know.
See, right? I think it's has to see how is it going to play out. And I think that's part of do you see maybe halfway through the season, are they one of those teams that goes and tries to grab a guy because maybe it's not working out the way that they intended it to? Yeah,
I think that's definitely a possibility. And the one thing I'll say, right, is there's no perfect formula for team building, right? I know a lot of Packer fans that weren't super upset about maybe not giving $30 million to a near 30-year-old wide receiver and instead using that money to go out and get players and bring players back while also picking up a 1st and a 2nd round pick, which got them Quay Walker and a piece of Christian Watson, right? So you add those, sort of 2 draft picks along with, guys that they were probably able to re-sign, like a Rasul Douglas, bring in a Jerron Reed, bring in a Sammy Watkins. You start looking, maybe a big part of the Devondre Campbell re-signing was a part of that money as well. I think you start looking at the money that Green Bay was able to spend on other players because they didn't spend it on Davante Adams, along with the 2 draft picks. Again, I think you start looking at a team that's maybe a little bit more diverse, 1 through 53 and on offense and on defense, rather than just having this 1 star. Again, I think Green Bay would have loved to have kept Davante Adams. And I think they do have a big question mark on offense. Specifically, you get down 10 points in a playoff game in the second half, all the teamwork and everyone doing their job and, all 11 doing what they're supposed to do sounds great. But at some point, you're down 10 in a playoff game. You need a stud on the outside that's just going to beat the corner across from him and go make a play, right? They had that in Davante, and we don't think they have that right now. So I think there's still questions that are going to have to be answered, but I still think a lot of people expect that this Packers team is going to be super competitive and have every opportunity to be as good as they want to be. I think they just need a couple things to break their way, and having a receiver, one of those guys that we mentioned, maybe break out a little bit more than they have, would be a big step in the right direction.
Right. Things are probably going to look a little bit different next year, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's everyone needs to panic and freak out. But we'll stay on money. Jaire Alexander just got a nice, pretty contract, $84 million, 4 years, $21 million a year. I like the contract. I saw a lot of things. Not every Packers fan is thrilled. It's a decent chunk of money. I get it. But you're paying a top cornerback and you're paying a guy that Green Bay drafted. Talk to me about this contract.
I love, and I mean, absolutely love this contract. So to me, it makes so much sense. He's still 25 years old. He's arguably the best cover corner in all of football. Yeah, he grinded last year just to be able to get back to play in that final game. Like, probably shouldn't have been able to, but the time, effort, and energy he put in, like, he clearly cares. He's an alpha at that position. One of my favorite things in training camps the last few seasons was like anytime Davante Adams was up, Jaire Alexander would sprint over because he wanted to go against Davante. Even as a rookie, like, he wanted to go against Davante immediately. Like that, he knew he was the guy and he wanted to do that. So like, you draft a guy in the first round that's that good and is still only 25, and like you pay them, right? And I think the other reason I really love this is we just saw Mike Williams, the wide receiver, get 20 million per season. We saw some interesting wide receivers get near to, 20 million per year. We saw Davante and Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs get at or close to or above 30 million per season. To me, corner in the next couple of years will now catch up to that because teams are now going to be paying the corners top end money to shut down the Tyreek Hills and the Davante Adams and the Stephon Diggses, right? So like, to me, there's a market inefficiency. I would say that teams generally tend to value a top tier corner over a top tier wide receiver more often than not, especially during the draft and those sort of things. Like we saw Stingley and Sauce Gardner, right, go before any of those wide receivers. So to me, there's a market inefficiency where the wide receivers are getting 30 million per year at the top and the top corners only at 21. That's Christian Kirk money. That is literally Christian Kirk money. So if you're telling me that I can get Jaire Alexander in the prime of his career at age 25, that guy, for the same price that the Jaguars basically got Christian Kirk at, yeah, I'm okay with that contract. And I think there's, like I said, it wouldn't shock me in the next 2 to 3 years if corners were starting to get 28, 29, 30 million. And now you're paying Jaire pennies on the dollar compared to some of those players. So I think they were smart to get it done now. Plus it freed up salary cap space that they desperately needed this season. To me, it was a win all the way around for both sides.
Right. And then you don't end up, like the New York Giants where you're cutting guys like James Bradbury, you put yourself in a position where, again, and I think a lot of teams could learn a lot by valuing players that you draft and that you develop. I think there's something to that. That's a value, like it adds so much value to a team that I think, just a lot of fans kind of miss out on that. But, with their defense, they committed to their defense a lot this offseason. Through the draft, first round picks, they got Walker, got Wyatt, two fantastic, awesome, two guys that I was very high on going into this draft. Absolutely love that. I mean, they got Joe Barry some fantastic tools here. Alexander extension, re-signing Campbell and Douglas, extending Smith. I think they signed Reed.
Jerron Reed. Yeah.
And I think I'm sure I'm missing a few things, but they've done, I think they made a point to make their defense a priority. How is that? Is this different from past years, and how will that benefit them going into this season? Because it is a big deal, and it's a notable difference that, to me, I think, again, is getting breezed over.
No, I agree with you 100%. And I think you hit the nail on the head, right? So like, this is a team that's put a ton of resources into defense this season, really on every level, right? So at defensive back, re-signing Jaire Alexander, re-signing Rasul Douglas, I think those were two huge moves in their defensive back room. Inside linebacker, a position that they haven't valued since AJ Hawk. Like that was the last time they put a legit anything into inside linebacker. Like, and the big question is like, they re-signed Devondre Campbell. Would like they put any more into it after they haven't put anything into it since AJ Hawk? And the answer was clearly yes. They go out and get Quay Walker. So inside linebacker, Walker and Devondre Campbell in the same offseason, big re-signing and again, their first pick in the draft. On the edge, again, you mentioned it, Preston Smith gets the extension there. They also grabbed Kingsley and Igbare in the 5th round. And then along the defensive line, where we've basically been begging the Packers to get Kenny Clark some help for years. Davonte Wyatt is their second first-round pick. And then they also go out and grab Jerron Reed. They also get, Ford in the 7th round as well. So they're just really buoying all levels of this defense. Tariq Carpenter's another, safety that they got in the 7th round. So I just think that they're consistently looking to add to this defense. And I think that Joe Barry wanted to play a lot more nickel with 2 linebackers than I think he could have with Chris Barnes. And they tried Henry Black in that role a little bit, and it just never really fit. I think now you have a defense where you've got 7 guys on the back end with Quay Walker and Devondre Campbell, Douglas, Stokes, and Jaire, and then Amos and Savage, that you don't have to change out for almost anything.
Yeah.
Like you've got your those guys that are going to like stay on the field. And then, Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith are going to play a ton at edge, and, Enigbare and those sort of guys will get some, run on there as well. And then along the defensive line, we know Kenny's going to play a ton, but now they've got a rotation, right? Dean Lowry and Jerron Reed and Devontae Wyatt and TJ Slayton, who they drafted a season ago, who has a lot of potential. They actually have a legit rotation up front. I just think like they have everything that they need if they can stay healthy to be one of the league's top defenses, which has been a rarity for Aaron Rodgers through the course of his career. I think this is a formula that they want to attack, right? I think they want to be a good running football team with Jones and Dillon. Let Aaron Rodgers be a superhero only when he needs to. Let him be the point guard and distribute the football to all of these weapons, even though you may not have that top tier guy. And in the meantime, be one of the top 5 defenses in football. I think that's a formula for success for Green Bay, and it has been a little bit of a dynamic change, specifically this offseason.
And it feels like it's all coming at the right time, right? So the receiver room might get weaker, without Adams. And I don't want to say that because I hate to say totally, there's a lot of depth there. And again, like there's question marks, but I think we still have we don't know what's happening. And I think also something that a lot of people are not talking, this division's getting a little bit stronger in some ways. I think the Lions are starting to put some pieces together to build a roster that, you get a quarterback in there next year. And if they keep playing for Dan Campbell the way that we saw, the Lions might start giving people a run for their money. I don't know if the Packers are the team that they're going to be running out of this division, but then the Vikings, not under Zimmer with a new regime in there. I don't know that I've loved every move that they've made this offseason, but talk to me about the NFC North and what that looks like for the Packers. Cause I think they're starting to strengthen things up a little bit all over the board there.
Yeah, so I think the NFC North is really interesting in regards to timelines, right? So Green Bay is doing everything that they can to, continue this window with Aaron Rodgers and keep it open for 2 to 3 more seasons and try to win at least one more Super Bowl with Rodgers during that time frame. So like they're reaching the end of that window, and again, desperately trying to do everything they can to keep that window open and give Rodgers one more Super Bowl ring and hopefully get Green Bay one more Super Bowl in that time frame. We'll get to the Lions and the Vikings in a second, but that's why I know a lot of people are like really down on the Chicago Bears for what they've done. And as somebody who covers and loves the Green Bay Packers, it pains me to say this. I actually really think it's smart what the Bears are doing. So like, I get that you want to see, Justin Fields with some weapons, right? And I do think there is at least a little bit of risk in if you don't give him some weapons that like, does he ever really develop the ability to get the ball out of his hands and like do some of those things that you really need to see him do? So I do think there's some risk there, but like to go out and spend a bunch of money on players now when you have no Super Bowl window in the immediate future, to me, that's sort of like you're taking future resources and spending them now when you have nothing to try to win for right now, especially with Green Bay doing everything that they can to win in the next couple seasons. To me, they're setting this up. They're going to see what they have in Fields, and they're setting it up to try to win 2 to 3 years from now when that Rodgers window closes, right? To me, that's a lot smarter than what the Vikings are doing in trying to compete with that Packers window at the same time, where even if like everything goes according to plan, maybe you like inch out Green Bay for the North, but you're probably still not in that Super Bowl category. Like you mentioned, there's some things they did well this offseason, but you still got Kirk Cousins at quarterback, which I don't know is enough to get you over the hump. Their defense, to me, like, yes, you added a couple guys, Lewis Seen I really like, but like, I think that defense, like there's no more Anthony Barr and like the Everson Griffins and the Danielle Hunters, like those guys are not exactly in there. Obviously Hunter's not in his prime anymore, right? Like they just don't have that same Vikings defense that we used to really know and appreciate. So I don't know that they have like a window over the next couple of years to compete with Green Bay, much less try to win a Super Bowl. To me, they would have been better off going in that sort of rebuild direction where maybe you get off of Cousins, you've got a new general manager, you've got a new head coach. Can you sort of open a window there? Meanwhile, the team that you mentioned, the Lions, sort of started that rebuild a year or two ago. And as you also mentioned, the only thing that they're really missing, right, is that top end quarterback. Everything else is sort of coming along nicely. They just add, to me, the best player in the draft. They get him second overall in Aiden Hutchinson. I love Jameson Williams, and I think they really did a smart thing with him of like, they're not competing for a Super Bowl this year either. So if he misses a good chunk of this year, it doesn't matter. So I love what they've done. I still think they need to find that quarterback, but they're getting closer and closer to being actually able to compete, and are probably the closest of the three teams in the division to make that jump once Aaron Rodgers does retire and Green Bay is ready to say, all right, we've got to do our own rebuild.
Right. And I think one of the nice things too for Green Bay, and I'm switching off of it and going in a different direction here, is, you know, the NFC North is also playing the NFC East, which is not the NFC in general is obviously not like the AFC. It's kind of a gift. And if you're one of those front leaders, you know, in San Francisco and the Rams, San Francisco debatable. There's a conversation to be had, obviously, about the quarterback. A lot of questions there, but I think Green Bay's in a nice spot because, you know, if they were not to win the division, which again, I don't, you know, I could probably put a decent amount of money down and feel very confident in that still. They're going to get a wild card spot. This isn't a difficult division. So let's look at, looking at next year, and I don't want to go with records, but what will it take for Green Bay to get past that devastating loss that they've seen every couple of years where they're right there and they're about to go a little farther and it's like, crap, what happened? Like what needs to come together and how do they get past that? Like what will be the biggest hurdle for them moving forward?
I mean, that's a constant question every year for the Packers and their fans, right? Because it's sort of like this curse where you're going to have Brett Favre, you're going to have Aaron Rodgers for 3 straight decades, a Super Bowl win with each of them, but every other season is going to be the most heartbreaking, excruciating playoff game that you can possibly imagine. So that's what you get for 3 decades, which I'm still not going to trade the 2 Super Bowls away, but there is some pain that goes along with it. But here's the thing, right? So I don't care, as you mentioned, unless something goes catastrophically wrong, Green Bay is pretty easily a playoff team, right? They're going to be one of the 7 seeds in the NFC, unless something goes catastrophically wrong, likely with Aaron Rodgers. And if that happens, you're just so screwed anyway. It doesn't even matter at that point. You're going so we're not even going to talk about that scenario. If Rodgers is healthy, you're one of the top 7 in a NFC that's just not very deep. So they've had home field advantage in the playoffs and it hasn't really got them anywhere. Right. So I don't really care if they have another, their 4th straight 13-win season with Matt LaFleur. It doesn't matter. If they need to experience a couple more losses through the course of the year so that they can learn some of those lessons in season that they can apply to the playoffs, so be it. If they need to go on the road and play in a dome where I think their speed and their speed on defense, their speed on offense and those sort of things, Rodgers at quarterback can play to the peak of their abilities. I'm not saying Rodgers' only Super Bowl came with 3 road games heading into the Super Bowl. They were able to navigate that. So the biggest thing for me is you had 3 really good regular season teams under Matt LaFleur for the past 3 seasons. Yeah. And again, it equated into 2 total playoff wins over 3 years. You got to play your best football in January and February. Every other team over the teams that ultimately won it the last 3 years found ways to evolve in the playoffs, become a different team and become a better team. I think the Rams are a great example of that. I think the Bucs are a great example of that. They became better teams once the playoffs hit. Green Bay didn't. They played their best football in October and November, December, etc. January and February came and they weren't as good. Not even as not only did they not evolve, I think they actually got worse than they were playing in the regular season. So whatever record they have, whether that's 10-7 or 13-4 or anything in between, they're going to be a playoff team. Just figure out a way to be playing your best football in January and February, which is something that's eluded Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers these past few seasons.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll round it out with 2 questions that just popped into my head here. So in the NFC, who do you think stands the biggest threat outside of the Rams? Because I understand that the Rams are, I know what the Rams are. Outside of the Rams, who do you think really will stand the biggest problem for Green Bay?
Yeah, I'll still go, I think, Tampa, and maybe that's a bit of a cop-out as well, but Yeah, like Tom Brady is just always in the conversation, right? Like I don't like it could be 10 years from now and Tom Brady's probably still in the conversation.
Right.
Like it just is what it is. And it did feel like at times that there was maybe some Brady and Arians friction that was happening. And I think that is, for their case, hopefully behind them. And it just feels like Brady would not have come back if he didn't think that this is an opportunity to go out and win another Super Bowl. I do think they have questions, but I think if Evans can be healthy and Godwin can get healthy and, Brady on offense with that defense, I think that defense still has the ability to get better. I don't think that they played quite up to their standard a season ago. They definitely still have some holes, but if you told me that Green Bay was traveling to Tampa Bay in the playoffs, that would be a team that would still give me some concern. And then I think the other one too is like the 49ers, right? So like if you mentioned the big question mark, right, of Trey Lance, if all of a sudden he brings a different dynamic to their game than what Jimmy Garoppolo was, able to do, Lance doesn't have to be perfect. That's a system with Kyle Shanahan where if you're even a good quarterback, Shanahan's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And if he can just make some plays with his legs and make some plays with his arm downfield, that is a team both offensively and defensively that is still chock full of talent. So you mentioned the Rams, the 49ers, the Bucks. It's difficult for me to see a team that just sort of like comes out of nowhere from the NFC. The Saints are really interesting, but I just don't trust Jameis. Like the Cowboys are still some level of interesting, but they've also got some holes and are just really like they're coming off some really big injuries as well. So like I struggle to see any team in the NFC that just all of a sudden comes out of nowhere and is like, well, did not see that coming. But again, that's what makes the NFL so great because there usually is at least one of those teams every year.
Right, definitely. And I mean, as a Giants fan, I know all about being the team that comes out of nowhere. Not that that's going to be them this year, but in the NFC, you have this higher tier of teams and everyone's kind of floating in this abyss of could possibly make a run for it and could possibly totally look horrendous next year. And we'll end on the Packers themselves. What is one player that you are looking forward to next year to be an impact that maybe not everyone would think of right off the bat?
That is a really good question. All right. So I'm just kind of going through positionally in my head. I am excited to see what TJ Slayton can bring in the middle of the defense. It's such a weird question with Green Bay because like, I think a lot of the players that are like on their team are like their starters. I don't know that there's a player that's necessarily expected to sort of come out of nowhere. I will say one rookie that I'm really intrigued by is Sean Ryan. I think he has a legit possibility to start at either right tackle or right guard. I'm dumb to bet on a third round pick for Green Bay because in the last decade, they haven't got anything from their third round picks. But I do think that's one. The tight end position, a couple other players that I'll shout out here too as well. Josiah DeGuara. So remember his rookie year, he tears his ACL. Last year's his sophomore season. And you could just tell those first 8 to 10 weeks, he was just sort of getting his legs back under him. And then towards the end of the year, starting with that Minnesota game in November, you could start to see him put the pieces together and come back from that injury and sort of start to be the player that I think Green Bay thought he could be when they spent a third round pick on him. Tyler Davis at the same position. He's a guy that they picked up out of completely nowhere and immediately gets on the field and starts playing 10 snaps a game, giving a ton of effort, showing he has some receiving chops. I think he could be this interesting mystery player. And then the other player that I'll just say too, and this is a super big cop out at this point, but I am of course, everyone wants to see their first pick, right? But I saw Quay Walker at Packers rookie mini camp in person. And some of the things that he was already doing, and it doesn't mean anything. It's not in pads. It's against rookies. These things literally mean nothing, but just made two really special plays in coverage in one-on-ones that you don't see linebackers make, much less linebackers his size with his physicality. There were just already special things that he was doing at even rookie mini camp that made you just go, okay, that's a special sort of play. So I think those are just some of the players that I'm really excited to see and what they can accomplish this upcoming year.
Yeah. And that's an awesome note to end on there. I won't keep you all night. I tried to not be as chatty, but yeah, Walker and Wyatt, I'm telling you, two of the guys, I was pumped to see where they landed, and to land on one team is awesome. And I think that they can both be very impactful right out of the gates. I thank you for coming on for my first 30. You were the first of the 32. So this was fantastic. You are awesome. If you guys have not checked out his podcast, definitely do it. Why don't you let them know again where they can find you on Twitter, even though it's on the screen, and where they can find your stuff?
I guess it just makes sense that you start with the 2022-2023 Super Bowl champion first as you kick off your entire series, right?
So juju. So everyone can thank me when you win the Super Bowl.
There you go. Exactly. So no, you can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can again follow the podcast at PackADay Podcast, and you can find the video version on YouTube. You can find the audio version wherever you get your favorite podcast. So again, make sure to check out the podcast 365 days a year, PackADay Podcast.
Yes, and it's fantastic, very informative, awesome to watch. Tons of good knowledge there. Again, Andy, thank you guys. Go check him out on Twitter. Go check out his show. And I will be back on Thursday, and we will be headed to the Detroit Lions, see what's up over there. Thanks again, guys.